The debris field shouldn't have been breathing. That was the first thing senior cartographer Vessel Mind Orith noticed, not the wreckage itself, which was expected, not the thermal signatures cooling across 3,000 kilometers of open void, which were predictable. What wasn't predictable was the rhythmic pressure variance emanating from the largest fragment, a pulse, slow, deliberate. 17 seconds between each compression wave, radiating outward through the vacuum like something vast was exhaling. Orith flagged it, filed it, then stared at the readout for a long time before filing a second notation, marked urgent, that read simply, "The wreckage is not empty." Nobody believed him. That was 6 standard cycles before the warship appeared. The laughter had started 4 years earlier, and it had been genuine, not cruel exactly, more the way a senior engineer laughs when a child explains their drawing of a perpetual motion machine. Fond, almost. Indulgent. The Interstellar Technical Consortium had been reviewing human engineering submissions for 11 years by that point, processing every design, every patent application, every schematic uploaded through the 17 relay stations humanity had been granted provisional access to after their species passed the verification accords. The submissions were earnest. That was the diplomatic word. In the private channels, less diplomatic words circulated. Primitive, inefficient, charming. The consortium's lead evaluator, a Drevithi engineer named Selene of the Fourth Spire, had compiled a report that was technically classified but practically famous, passed from station to station, quoted at engineering symposia, referenced in 3 separate academic texts on the cognitive limitations of oxygen-dependent biology. The report was called "On the Systematic Over-Reliance on Redundancy in Human Mechanical Design." Its central argument was simple. Humans built everything twice, sometimes 3 times. They installed backup systems for backup systems, routed secondary power conduits alongside primary ones, sealed compartments that had seals, and then sealed those seals. They used materials rated for 5 times the maximum expected stress. They tested to destruction levels that no operational scenario would ever approach. The report included 17 appendices of specific examples, each one cataloged with the same gentle, bewildered conclusion. Why would any rational species design as though they expect everything to fail? The Drevathi had answered their own question, because humans, statistically, were terrible engineers. They don't understand their own systems well enough to predict failure points. Selene of the Fourth Spire had told an interviewer from the consortium's public journal 3 years ago. So they compensate with volume, layers. It is not engineering. It is anxiety expressed in metal. The interviewer had laughed. The whole galaxy had laughed, in its way. Commander Yara Vasquez had heard the report quoted back to her exactly once by a consortium port inspector who'd been reviewing the Persephone's construction manifests. He'd said it without malice. That almost made it worse. Anxiety expressed in metal, he'd said, scrolling through the schematics, his 4-fingered hand moving the display with practiced efficiency. I mean no offense. Your builders simply have a different philosophy. Yara had looked at him for a moment. No offense taken, she said. Then she went back to her pre-flight checklist, which was, by consortium standards, 3 times longer than it needed to be. She'd run every item on it, twice. The Persephone was not a beautiful ship. She was a human ship, which meant she was dense, layered, over-engineered to a degree that made consortium inspectors visibly uncomfortable. Her hull was thick enough that the inspector's standard resonance scanners couldn't fully penetrate it, which had generated its own small controversy. A hull that thick was structurally inefficient, they said, redistributing mass in ways that compromised maneuverability. The drive system had 4 redundant ignition pathways, any one of which could run the ship independently. The life support was tripled. The navigation computer had a secondary navigation computer. The secondary navigation computer had a tertiary navigation computer that wasn't connected to either of the others and ran on completely isolated power. The Persephone was, by consortium metrics, a catastrophically overbuilt vessel crewed by 15 humans and carrying enough backup capacity to run 3 normal ships simultaneously. She'd launched 8 months ago and nobody had expected her back. Not because they wished her harm, simply because the region she was surveying, the Veth Corridor, a gravitational dead zone between 2 competing stellar formations, was considered a routine survey run, low priority. The kind of mission that got assigned to species who needed field hours before being granted full consortium membership, a proving ground, a test, the kind of test you passed by not embarrassing yourself too badly. 3 mysteries lived in the initial reports that came back from the Veth Corridor before communications went quiet. The first was the debris field. It appeared in the Persephone's preliminary survey logs, a field of wreckage matching no known vessel registration in the consortium database, carbon dating to approximately 300 years prior. The field shouldn't have existed. The Veth Corridor was unoccupied space. It had been unoccupied space for as long as the consortium had kept records. Something had been destroyed there, quietly, 3 centuries ago, and nobody had noticed. The second was the signal. Buried in the routine telemetry that the Persephone transmitted in her 4th week was a 17-second oscillating compression wave, a pulse. Yara's science team had flagged it as a geological anomaly, possibly a remnant pressure wave from an old detonation. Routine, logged, filed. The third was what nobody noticed at the time because it required reading the manifests very carefully. The Persephone had launched with her standard crew of 15. Her official passenger manifest listed 15 names. But the supply allocation, food, water, atmospheric recycling capacity, had been filed for 19 people, 4 extra people's worth of supplies, for a crew of 15. Cartographer Orith had noticed the debris field's pulse. Nobody had noticed the manifest discrepancy. Nobody knew what the wreckage was. And then, 6 weeks after the pulse was logged, the Persephone's communications went entirely dark. Consortium protocol for a missing survey vessel was to wait 12 standard cycles before dispatching a recovery team. Humanity's survey mission wasn't even worth the formal inquiry. The Persephone was a single human vessel on a low-priority run. The consortium issued a standard notification to Earth's liaison office, filed the appropriate paperwork, and scheduled a patrol vessel to pass through the corridor in 9 cycles. The patrol vessel never made it. The Veth auxiliary cruiser Steadfast Deliberation was 3 times the Persephone's mass, consortium-built, crewed by 40 experienced officers of 4 different species, and equipped with the most current navigational and defensive systems available. It entered the Veth corridor at standard speed, running all sensor sweeps per protocol. 4 hours after entry, it stopped transmitting. That got attention. Senior Fleet Director Amith Kale was not a being who expressed alarm easily. She had commanded the consortium's 3rd survey fleet for 19 years. She had managed species contact incidents, gravitational anomalies, piracy interdictions, and 2 separate boundary disputes that had technically qualified as small wars. She reviewed the data on the Steadfast Deliberation's silence with the careful, methodical attention she brought to every problem, and she asked the question any rational commander would ask. What in the corridor could do that to a cruiser? Nobody answered her. The human ship went dark first, said her intelligence liaison, a Theric named Pelsa, reviewing the timeline. The Persephone, the survey vessel. It went silent 6 weeks before the Steadfast Deliberation was dispatched, and nobody connected those events. A human survey vessel going silent in an unmapped zone was considered. Pelsa paused, within expected parameters. For a human vessel. Amith Kal looked at him for a long time. Pull everything we have on the Persephone, she said. Every scrap of telemetry, every survey log, everything they transmitted before going dark. The data is minimal. Humans don't transmit continuously. They batch send in scheduled windows, a practice we've always considered. I know what we've always considered it, she said. Pull it anyway. What they found reviewing the transmission logs with the desperate attention of people who have just lost an auxiliary cruiser was the manifest discrepancy: food and water for 19, crew of 15. They had extra people aboard, Pelsey said, or they planned to have extra people aboard. How would they have extra people in a corridor that was supposed to be uninhabited? Neither of them had an answer. Third vessel sent into the Veth corridor was not a survey ship and not an auxiliary cruiser. It was a full consortium warship, the Unbroken Meridian, a heavy combat platform crewed by 200 officers, armed with enough firepower to sterilize a small moon. Fleet Director Amith Kaal herself was aboard. She was not taking chances. The Unbroken Meridian entered the corridor with weapons armed, shields fully extended, sensor arrays operating at maximum resolution. Amith Kaal stood at the primary observation deck and watched the void resolve ahead of them with the focused patience of someone who had decided that if there was something in that corridor, she was going to find it. What she found 2 hours into the transit was the debris field. It was exactly where Orth had cataloged it, and it was enormous, several thousand kilometers across, dense enough in places to constitute a navigational hazard. The Unbroken Meridian sensors cataloged thousands of fragments ranging from dust grain size to pieces larger than a shuttle. Carbon dating confirmed it. 300 years. Whatever had happened here, it had happened 300 years ago. Can we identify the vessel type? Amith Kaal asked. Working on it, said Chief Analyst Veth Prime, a heavily augmented Korith who processed data faster than any organic analyst in the fleet. 3 minutes passed. Then, Director, the alloy composition doesn't match any vessel type in the consortium registry. Unknown species? The alloy composition matches no vessel type in our historical registry either. No extinct species. No pre-consortium civilization we have records of. Veth Prime's 4 eyes moved across 5 simultaneous data streams, but we're getting a secondary reading that's unusual. Show me. The display shifted. Buried in the debris field's thermal profile, cycling on a 17-second interval, was the pulse, slow, rhythmic, radiating outward in perfect compression waves. It's the same signal the purse phone logged, Pelsey said quietly. Yes, Amith Kaal said. It is. They thought it was a geological remnant. Did they? It wasn't a question. She stared at the pulse on the display. That slow, deliberate, 17-second rhythm. Does a geological remnant have a heartbeat? The bridge went quiet. Get me everything humans ever submitted to the consortium technical database about propulsion, she said. Everything, including the submissions we rejected. Including the ones that made the engineering division laugh. This is the part where the story everyone thought they knew starts becoming a different story entirely. The propulsion submissions had been reviewed, rejected, filed. In 11 years of humanity's provisional consortium membership, their engineering team had submitted 47 unique propulsion concepts. 43 had been rejected as impractical. 3 had been accepted in modified forms, integrated into existing consortium technology with humans receiving nominal credit. 1 had been rejected so firmly that the review board had included a diplomatic addendum suggesting humanity focus its resources on fields better suited to its current technical development. That submission was filed under the dry bureaucratic title, Variable Resonance Hull Application for Passive Environmental Integration. Veth Prime pulled it from the archive. He read it once, then he read it again. Then he said, in a tone Amith Kaal had never heard from him, Director, we made a mistake. The submission wasn't about propulsion. It had been misfiled under propulsion because the review board, seeing the word resonance in the title, had routed it to the wrong department. The concept was actually something entirely different. Something that, reading it now, in the context of a debris field that pulsed like a living thing, made Amith Kaal feel a cold she associated with nothing so much as the moment you realized the threat was never where you were looking. The human design was simple, embarrassingly simple, the kind of simple that gets dismissed as naive by anyone who has spent their life engineering complex solutions to complex problems. The idea, if you match the resonance frequency of your hull material to the ambient frequency of the space around you, if you tune the material itself to vibrate at the same rate as the void, you would become, to any sensor array that operated by detecting differential resonance, effectively invisible. Not cloaked, not shielded, not hidden behind any active system, simply identical to nothing. The hull thickness, Amith Kaol said slowly. The words came out one at a time, like she was checking them before releasing them. Their hull was too thick for our resonance scanners to fully penetrate. We filed that as a structural inefficiency, yes. But if the hull itself was tuned to match ambient resonance, our scanners wouldn't see it as a hull. They would see it as extended void. Veth Prime's voice was very flat. We couldn't penetrate it because there was nothing to penetrate. We were scanning through it. The Persephone has been in that debris field for 6 weeks. Yes, the pulse we detected is not geological. He looked at her. I believe it is a drive signature. Specifically, a drive that has been cycling at idle for 6 weeks, waiting. The bridge was very quiet. 4 extra people's worth of supplies, Amith Kaol said. Yes, they didn't take extra people. They took extra time. She understood then, completely, the way you understand something when all the evidence collapses into a single image that you can't unsee. The Persephone hadn't gone dark because something had happened to her. She'd gone dark because she'd chosen to. She'd entered that debris field, powered down all active transmission, and tuned her hull to the ambient resonance of 300 years of old destruction, and she had sat there in perfect silence, invisible to every scan the consortium had run, while the steadfast deliberation entered the corridor. And where is the steadfast deliberation? Amith Kaol asked. Nobody answered immediately. Where is it? V Prime pulled the sensor sweeps. All of them, from the moment they'd entered the corridor. He overlaid them, cross-referenced, eliminated debris returns one by one. Director, he said. His voice had developed something Amith Kaol had never heard in it. A quality she would later describe as the sound of something very large and very certain becoming uncertain. The steadfast deliberation is also in the debris field. It's been here the whole time. Our sensors have been reading it as debris. They captured it? He processed. I don't know. I genuinely don't know. I don't know how a survey vessel with 15 crew captures a fully armed auxiliary cruiser with 40. He paused. 19 with the 4 extra. 19 humans against 40 trained officers. Amith Kaol gripped the edge of the display console. Open a hailing frequency, she said. Broad spectrum, every frequency humans use, every band. Static for a moment, then a voice. Human. Female. Calm in the way that people are calm when they've been waiting a long time for something to finally happen. Unbroken Meridian, this is Commander Yara Vasquez of the survey vessel Persephone. We've been expecting you. Please don't fire. I have something to show you. The Persephone revealed herself slowly. That was the word for it, revealed. One moment the debris field's thermal return was exactly what it had been. The next, a shape differentiated itself from the background, a ship silhouette separating from the static scatter of old wreckage with the patient deliberateness of something that had been choosing not to be visible and was now choosing differently. She was smaller than Amith Kaol remembered from the technical specs. Or maybe she only seemed smaller because she just demonstrated something that made every assumption about her size and capability feel suddenly unreliable. All weapons hold, Amith Kaol said immediately. Then, into the channel, Commander Vasquez, explain, that's going to take a while. A pause. I'd suggest you also stop trying to scan us. Your resonance arrays are going to give you a headache. Emeth Kaal looked at Veth Prime. He confirmed silently that yes, they had been continuously scanning the phone for the past 4 minutes and getting nothing useful. The steadfast deliberation, Emeth Kaal said. What happened to it? It's intact. All 40 crew are unharmed. Another pause. Briefer. Mostly unharmed. There was an incident with Lieutenant Prass that was an honest misunderstanding. Mostly unharmed. He's fine. He was very surprised and reacted poorly, and then he was a little bit not fine for a short period, and then he was fine again. It's handled. Emeth Kaal pressed the heel of her hand to the side of her head. How did you capture an auxiliary cruiser, Commander? The answer came back without hesitation. With the tone of someone who had rehearsed it and was being careful to be accurate. We didn't go into their ship. We made their ship go somewhere. There's a difference. That is not an explanation. No, Vasquez agreed. It's a preview. Are you going to invite me aboard, or should we keep doing this over comms? She came over in a shuttle with 2 members of her crew. Emeth Kaal had expected a military bearing. What she got was a woman of medium height in a ship suit that showed 6 weeks of hard use, with dark circles under her eyes and a calm that read less like discipline and more like exhaustion that had been converted through long practice into something functional. She was younger than Emeth Kaal had imagined. She looked at the unbroken Meridian's hangar bay with the evaluating attention of someone cataloging structural details. She handed over a data core immediately, without being asked. Full logs, she said, everything. Every decision, every modification, every communication with the Steadfast Deliberations crew. I want this documented from our end before you form your own account. That's unexpectedly forthcoming, said Pelsaw. We're not trying to hide anything. She looked at him directly. We knew the consortium was going to send something after the cruiser went quiet. We banked on it being big enough to talk to. You orchestrated this entire situation to have a conversation? Emeth Kaal said, to have a specific conversation with someone who had authority to make a decision. The exhaustion was visible under the calm now, like rock under shallow water. You have a problem, Director, that you don't know about yet. We found it 6 weeks ago. We've been sitting in that debris field for 6 weeks because we needed to figure out how to make you listen, and also because we couldn't leave until we understood what we were dealing with. Emeth Kaal looked at her for a long moment. Show me, she said. The debris field was 300 years old. The pulse was not. That was the first thing Vasquez explained, leading Emeth Kaal through the data her team had collected in 6 weeks of close observation that no other vessel had ever gotten close enough to take. The wreckage was old. The energy signature cycling inside it, the 17-second pulse, was operational. Active, it wasn't emanating from any particular fragment of the field. It was emanating from the field as a whole, as though the field itself had a distributed function, as though the 3,000 kilometers of wreckage were not wreckage at all, but a structure. Something is using the debris as camouflage, Emeth Kaal said. Something has been using it for 300 years, Vasquez corrected. We think whatever made this debris field did it deliberately, scattered the material in a specific pattern, created something that looked like destruction, reads like destruction on every known sensor type, and then hid inside it. Hid. Pelsay's voice was very careful. For 300 years, at least. We don't know when it started. We know when we found the first evidence of the cycle deviating. Vasquez pulled up a timeline on the shared display. The pulse changed 17 days before we arrived. It increased in frequency from 17 seconds to 11 seconds. We think. She stopped. You think what? We think it's waking up. The silence on the bridge had a texture to it. The kind of silence that forms when a large number of people are all having the same realization at the same moment, and nobody wants to be the first one to say it aloud. It was Pelsaw who got there. The steadfast deliberation, he said. It didn't go dark because you captured it. No, something else disabled it. We didn't capture the steadfast deliberation intelligence liaison. We rescued it. The crew's been on our ship for the past 5 weeks. Vasquez's voice stayed level, but her jaw was tight. When it entered the corridor, whatever is in that field reached out and shut down every active system on that cruiser simultaneously. Complete power failure. 40 officers in a cold, dark ship with emergency reserves. We got them all before the secondary systems failed. Amith Kaal felt something she recognized from long experience as the particular quality of fear that only arrives when you have just realized the scope of the thing that is coming is substantially larger than what you have prepared for. What disabled a consortium cruiser? We don't know exactly. Our best analysis is a directional resonance pulse, very precisely targeted, designed to overwhelm the differential between a ship's internal resonance and the ambient void. It essentially rang them like a bell until everything shook apart at the component level. Vasquez looked directly at Amith Kaal. It cannot do that to my ship. My hull doesn't have a differential. There's nothing to ring. The room understood. Your over-engineered hull, Veth Prime said, and the words came out with a quality none of them had expected. The quality of someone who had just watched something they had laughed at become the only thing standing between them and something they couldn't name. The anxiety expressed in metal, Vasquez said, quietly, without bitterness. Yes. What happened next took 11 hours and taxed every person in that room to their limits, and it began with Yara Vasquez explaining exactly what she and her crew of 1915 crew, 4 specialists who had been added to the manifest without appearing on it because the consortium's intake system automatically flagged undeclared personnel, and she couldn't risk that flag triggering administrative delay, had spent 6 weeks doing in that debris field. They had mapped it, every fragment, every resonance signature. They had recorded every variation in the pulse cycle and built a predictive model of its acceleration. They had identified through 7 weeks of painstaking analysis with equipment the consortium considered under-spec'd and primitive the location of the central node, the thing at the heart of the field that was generating the pulse, around which all the debris had been deliberately arranged. They had not approached it. Why not? Amith Kaal asked. Because we didn't have anything that could survive contact with it yet, and I wasn't going to send people at something that killed a cruiser. A beat. We're reckless. We're not stupid. What is it? Vasquez pulled up the central display. The image was taken from a probe, a small, cheaply made human probe with a hull alloy that, predictably, was twice as thick as it needed to be. The probe had gotten closer to the central node than any of the consortium's sensor sweeps had reached because the consortium sensors had been repelled by the node's resonance pulse long before the probe had noticed anything unusual. The image showed a sphere, perfectly smooth, approximately 40 meters in diameter, floating in the exact geometric center of the debris field with the stillness of something that had been there for a very long time and expected to be there for much longer. Around it, the debris rotated slowly. It put everything in orbit around itself, Amith Kaal said. Yes. Slowly, carefully, over 300 years. Vasquez paused. It's not wreckage from something that was destroyed. It's material it collected. The debris field is a shell it built. Another pause, shorter. It's a seed, Director. Whatever made it seeded the Veth corridor and left this thing here, and it has been collecting mass and building a shell and cycling its power up, and now the cycle is accelerating. She looked at the sphere on the display. We need to destroy it before it finishes waking up. And the only ship in this corridor that can survive getting close enough to do that is mine. Amith Kaal stared at the sphere. What happens if it finishes waking up? Vasquez's answer was to pull up a secondary file, projections her team had built based on the acceleration curve of the pulse cycle. Energy output projections, range projections. The numbers were very large. It will ring every ship in this sector like a bell, Vasquez said. Every ship with a hull resonance differential, which is every consortium ship. She let that land. Every ship except mine. You're saying your ship is currently the only thing that can. I'm saying my ship and my crew and my people are going to go put a shaped charge package against that sphere and detonate it before it completes its cycle, yes. The calm had become something else, something harder and quieter and more decided. I need you to keep the unbroken meridian at the corridor perimeter, outside range. Because when the sphere reacts to an approach, I don't want you in play. When it reacts, it's going to react. We know that. We've watched it respond to the probe approaches. It pulses. We'll take the pulse on our hull and we'll keep moving. She said it the way you say things you have already fully accepted. My hull will take it. My people will take it. That's what we built for. And Meth Kaal said, Commander, your ship was designed for survey work. The crew manifest lists 1519. 19 people, against an unknown entity that disabled a combat vessel without being approached. I cannot authorize. You don't have to authorize anything. Vasquez stood up. We already decided, 6 weeks ago sitting in that debris field watching the cycle accelerate. We decided. I'm telling you as a courtesy because I want the consortium to have the full record and because I need you to keep your ship out of the way so it doesn't complicate things. She picked up the data core. Then she set it back down, leaving it on the table. That's yours. That's everything. Whatever happens. She walked to the door. Commander, Ameth Kaal said. Vasquez stopped but didn't turn. Why? You've been carrying this for 6 weeks. You could have pulled out, transmitted coordinates, and let the consortium deploy an appropriate force. There isn't time for an appropriate force. The words were flat and certain. We ran the numbers. There isn't time. And nobody else's ship survives the approach. She turned then, finally, and looked at Ameth Kaal with an expression that was not heroism, was not resolve, was something more fundamental than either of those things. We're the only ones who can, so we will. A pause. It's really not more complicated than that. She left. The Persephone separated from the unbroken meridian 2 hours later and began her approach to the sphere. Ameth Kaal watched on sensors, the imperfect differential-based sensors that could barely distinguish the Persephone from background void. She watched the small human ship move toward the center of the debris field with a slowness that was either caution or confidence, and she couldn't tell which, and she thought about the consortium's report and the laughter and anxiety expressed in metal and the way a species that has been told it over-engineering turns out to be the only thing that works. The sphere reacted when the Persephone was 8 kilometers out. The pulse shifted. Frequency jumped from 11 seconds to 4. Energy output spiked across every spectrum Ameth Kaal sensors could read. What that meant for the Persephone's crew, what it felt like inside that hull as the resonance pulse crashed against them, over and over, 4-second intervals, trying to find a differential, trying to find the gap between the ship and the void, to drive itself into. She could only imagine. She could hear Vasquez's voice on the open channel, communicating with her crew. Mendez, give me full structural read. Talk to me. Hull integrity nominal. Secondary layer showing stress in section 7. It's holding. Chen. Drive's complaining, but it's working. We're still moving. How far? 6 kilometers. 5.8. A spike in the pulse. Ameth Kaal saw it on the display. An enormous spike, energy levels that redlined her sensors, that would have, she understood with cold certainty, been the equivalent of what hit the steadfast deliberation, the thing that had shut down every system simultaneously. The Persephone kept moving. Section 7 is holding, came Mendez's voice. 7 and 9 are both showing stress, still nominal. Hull integrity. Still intact. It's loud, Commander. Whatever it's doing, it's loud. But where? A gap in communications. Short. 2 seconds. Ameth Kaal's grip on the console edge was tight enough to ache. We're fine. came Vasquez's voice. "We're fine. Keep moving. How far?" 3 kilometers, 2.6. "Close enough. Kira, are the packages ready?" A new voice, younger, tight with controlled fear. "Packages are ready. Manual deploy confirmed. I'm ready. You know what you're doing? I've run it 63 times. 64, Vasquez said. "Run it once more in your head while I fly us in." Silence. The pulse spiked again and again, 4-second intervals, hammering. The Persephone sensor return on Amith-Kayal's display showed nothing, showed void, showed background. But the compression waves in the surrounding space showed a ship absorbing enormous energy and refusing, through sheer density of material and redundancy of system, to break. 2 kilometers. 1. "Packages away," said Kira's voice. "Timer is running." "Commander, we need to, I know." Vasquez's voice. "Mendez, full drive. Get us out." "Which vector?" "Any vector. Now." The purse phone moved. On the display, the compression wave shifted, spreading out as she accelerated. The pulse from the spear intensified, a last enormous spike, the kind of pulse that registered as a physical pressure wave across the unbroken Meridian's hull 300 kilometers away, and then silence. 7 seconds. 8. "Commander Vasquez," Amith-Kayal said. "Report." Static. 4 seconds of static that felt like much longer. Then, "Still here." A pause. A rough exhale. "Section 7 hull layer is compromised. Secondary layer held. We're venting some atmosphere from a microfracture in the outer plating, but we've already sealed it." "Everyone is." Another pause, shorter. "Everyone is here. The sphere gone." Vasquez's voice was flat. "Empty in the way things go empty after long stress suddenly leaves. We lost 2 probes, and I have to tell you about Section 7 in more detail when I'm not shaking, but the spear is gone, and the pulse has stopped, and the field is just debris now, just old metal in a corridor." Amith-Kayal looked at the display. The debris field was still, the pulse was gone. The 17-second rhythm that had been cycling, building, waking was simply absent. A silence where something had been, and the silence itself felt enormous. "Your crew," she said. "All 19. All 19. A breath." Kira twisted her ankle, getting thrown across the cargo bay. "Mendez has a cut on his forehead. The rest of us are going to be feeling the resonance stress in our joints for a week." Vasquez's voice, under the exhaustion, held something that sounded like dark amusement. "I've had worse survey runs." The formal inquiry took 6 months. The report that emerged from it was classified at the highest level, which meant, in practice, that its conclusions were known to everyone within 4 months and publicly discussed within 8. The debris field had been a seeding construct. Pre-consortium origin. The entity responsible for it was unknown, had been unknown for 300 years, would likely remain unknown. What the construct had been designed to do was clear enough in retrospect. Collect mass, build capacity, wake slowly, quietly, in a space nobody considered worth watching. The Veth corridor was not the only unmonitored corridor in consortium space. That was the finding that kept Amith-Kayal awake. That was the finding that generated 6 emergency sessions of the Technical Review Board and eventually produced a new survey protocol, a protocol that mandated, for the first time in consortium history, that all deep surveys be conducted with hull material rated to at minimum 3 times the structural stress tolerance required. That mandated redundancy in all active sensor systems. That mandated supplies for a duration 30% longer than the expected mission. The protocol was, technically, built on human engineering philosophy. The vote to adopt it passed without dissent. Nobody laughed. Solène of the Fort Spire issued a retraction of her report. It was formal, precise, and entirely correct in its technical reassessment. It acknowledged that redundancy in engineering was not a cognitive limitation but a design philosophy, that building to survive scenarios you cannot predict was not anxiety but foresight. That a hull which appeared over-engineered to standard sensor analysis was, in fact, engineered to a different standard, one that assumed the universe contained things that had not yet been encountered. She sent a copy of the retraction directly to Commander Yara Vasquez. Vasquez sent back a brief acknowledgement. 3 sentences. The first sentence thanked Selena of the Fourth Spire for the communication. The second sentence said she hoped they might collaborate on future engineering reviews. The third sentence said, "We always assumed things would go wrong because everything always does eventually. We just built for it." Selene of the Fourth Spire kept that message. She'd been told this by a colleague who asked her about it once, years later. "You still have it?" the colleague asked. "Yes." "Why?" She thought about it for a moment. About a species that had been dismissed, that had laughed at, that had submitted designs to a review board that filed them in the wrong department and moved on. That had sat in a debris field for 6 weeks in a ship that looked inefficient and overbuilt, absorbing pulse after pulse, holding together not through elegance, but through the sheer uncompromising insistence of material that refused to fail. Because they assumed the universe would try to kill them, she said, and they were right, and they built anyway, and I think there's something in that I haven't finished understanding yet. The Persephone was recommissioned after 6 weeks of repairs. Section 7's outer hull layer was replaced entirely. The secondary layer, which had held, was reinforced. The new hull was, by every consortium metric, even more over-engineered than before. There is a thing that happens, Amith Kahl thought, watching the repair reports, when you have seen what should have been impossible and then discovered it was only impossible to those who assumed the universe would comply with their models of it. There is a reorganization of categories, a reclassification of what counts as strength and what counts as inefficiency and what counts as the difference between the two. The galaxy had looked at human engineering and seen redundancy, had seen layers upon layers, backup upon backup, material rated for stresses that shouldn't arise, had seen a species that didn't trust its own designs, that built as though convinced failure was waiting, had laughed at the anxiety expressed in metal. What the galaxy had not understood, what it required a 300-year-old sphere in a dead corridor and a 15-person survey crew watching a cruiser go dark to finally make visible, was that the humans were not building against failure they expected. They were building against failure they knew was coming, even when they didn't know its shape, its timing, or its name. They were building for the unknown thing, the unprecedented thing, the thing that had never been catalogued because it had never been encountered. They were building for this. The Persephone, launched on her second assignment on a clear operational morning, Yara Vasquez in command, 19 names on the crew manifest, supplies allocated for 24. She entered a corridor that had been considered low priority, unmapped, not worth a full survey team. The consortium's new protocol flagged the supplies discrepancy automatically. The intake officer reviewed it, noted the excess allocation, considered filing a request for clarification, then closed the file, marked it approved, and moved on. Some excesses, he had decided, were not inefficiencies. The Persephone disappeared into the dark. Somewhere ahead of her, the universe was preparing whatever it had been quietly building for the past 300 years. She was already designed for it.